Hello and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Richardson and I'm from Art of Mentoring based in Australia. We're a mentoring consultancy and business that helps organisations design, set up and implement mentoring programs. I'm very pleased to be hosting my colleague here in Australia, David Clutterbuck. We are actually in the same building, but to have better sound, we're actually in different rooms. So we're together, but we're not actually physically together so that we can have better sound for you. David, would you like to say hello? And then I might do some housekeeping about GoToWebinar and so on.
Absolutely. So, hello, I'm David Clutterbuck, and I'm one of the co-founders of the European Mentoring Coaching Council, and also the founder of the Coaching Mentoring International. It's a global community of specialist consultants and trainers in mentoring.
Great, thanks, David. So welcome, and we might just do a little bit of technology quick check-in. So if you haven't used GoToWebinar before, there is a question box which you hopefully can find. Please use that, ask us questions, put comments in. I'm keeping my eye on it all the time, so we're very happy to stop and answer questions as we go, and we'll certainly try and allow a little bit of time at the end for people to ask questions, so we really encourage that. What else? If you want us to open your microphone, that's probably going to be difficult, but raise your hand. It depends on how many people tune in, whether we can actually manage that. So to get us started and make sure that you know how to use that question box, I'd like to invite you to just quickly say, yes, I can hear you. I can see the slide on the screen which says CMI webinar series, enabling mentoring programs with technology. Can you just quickly, yes, I can hear you and see you. Excellent. And maybe let us know where you are in the world. So we're interested to know what cities and countries people are tuning in from. Okay, Melbourne, excellent. Sydney. Denmark, excellent. South Africa. Oh, we've got an interesting mix today, David.
Indeed, yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us, and you know, we're going to get started. So let's just talk about the agenda quickly. What we intend to cover today is an overview of some of the program management software and the digital learning platforms that can be used for mentoring programs, and hopefully give you some information to decide whether and which technology might be right for you and your organisation. And David's going to cover the research evidence for virtual mentoring relationships and some practical advice for anyone that's running a program virtually. And then we'll both have something to say about where is technology taking us in the future. So I'm going to let David kick us off with a bit of context. Over to you, David.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. We've seen mentoring programs evolve in multiple ways and gradually get to move from being entirely face-to-face to using a whole variety of different media. We see, for example, for quite some time, we've been able to use Skype or other audio-visual methods, which have some great benefits to them, but also some negatives to them as well, not least necessarily the consistency of the technology. We've had mentoring programs done entirely by telephone, some even just using text or primarily using text for inner city kids. On the way, we're told, and these things do have a habit of happening, that we won't be long before we are able to have our mentor or our mentee beamed in to sit beside us as a hologram, to give you the illusion that they're actually in the same room with you. That's quite mind-blowing, actually. We've also already got things like Mentor Master as a virtual assistant to people to the first time mentor, or somebody who's learning the mentoring role, sort of sitting by Nelly, taking them through the questions, helping them to work out where they are in the conversation with the mentee, and basically holding their hands through the process. Similarly, we've got diagnostic assistants. One that's making quite a lot of waves is called CoachBot. And essentially that is a method, a series of algorithms that ask questions of teams, and both individually and collectively, and then collects the data, and looks for patterns within it, so that will basically help teams understand themselves collectively and individually. And then we've got virtual worlds and avatars. Probably the most advanced of these is something called ProReal, which basically allows you to take an issue, to discuss it, divorce it from all the concerns you have about it, and see it as if it was something meant as a metaphor. And in that metaphor, you can walk around, you can create symbols, you can have speech bubbles. I particularly like the way that if you've got something that is a sort of big cloud behind you, that the inner voice, or nagging inner voice, first it can be sitting on your shoulders, and then you can enlarge it so it's a great big red angry thing towering over you. You can have all of these images and actually give a visual representation that allows you to examine emotions in particular, from a dispassionate or relatively dispassionate perspective. And then, of course, we've got AI, artificial intelligence, and that's the big question as to how will that work. We've certainly seen that AI programs have had a remarkable effect in certain circumstances. Experiments with the University of Southern California have shown that they can trauma victims, particularly soldiers from the war in the Middle East, actually prefer, on average, to have an AI therapist doing the diagnosis of their illness. That's quite scary in some ways, but the reason it's able to do this is that the AI is able to do a much better job of looking at a wider variety of data, and looking for themes and patterns, and all the time while effectively attending to what the person is doing. If as a human we try and attend at the same time, we can't really do that analysis in parallel. It registers micro-expressions, so that things that as a therapist the person wouldn't normally see. And other physical signs like hunching shoulders or moving forward, the postural stuff, or the stress within the tone that people use. But it carries on. It's not stopping to do all these things. It's doing it in the background. It also gives you a very accurate record of what went on before, so you don't have to take notes. The notes are already there. And unlike human coaches or mentors, it doesn't actually have to worry too much about projecting its own experiences, and the confusion between its own stuff and the client stuff, because its mind doesn't work that way, if you can call it a mind. So in all these things, there's actually a lot of benefits from having an AI, at least in the picture. But whether or not AI can actually replace coaching and mentoring is a big question, and we're going to come back to that later on. So what we can see is from all of the media that we've talked about here, and presumably from, as far as we can tell, for AI as well, a mentoring platform is the tool that pulls them all together, that integrates, are being able to use this wide variety of media in a most effective way. And increasingly what we're seeing is that mentoring in the future will rely more and more on a mixture of different ways of communicating, of different technologies, all there to provide us with greater insights that will help the client or the mentee to think their issues through, and to understand both themselves and the environment in which they operate.
So We are thinking about, well, why is there such a resurgence or an interest in technology? And I suppose people are interested in technology in general, but the people that we talk to, people who are our clients, really are thinking about technology as a way to make their programs more accessible, particularly to participants who maybe can't access a mentor in a face-to-face relationship. This means you can actually build your programs and achieve some scale and reach many, many more people than you could before that technology was around. Technology can be used to reduce the administrative burden of running a mentoring program. And technology can also give some better educational outcomes in some cases, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So we'll focus in this talk about technology that's being used to manage programs and also technology for virtual mentoring. And David and I have been having a little conversation the last couple of days about this. Is technology actually undermining mentoring? Do you want to cover this slide, David?
Yeah, sure. What we've observed is that a lot of organisations are talking about mentoring and saying we have a mentoring program or we want a mentoring program, and what they really mean by it is that they want something which is just a transaction exchange of information, or maybe they want to put somebody together with somebody who's got some experience of a particular situation, but it's very short term. It's very, it is, as we say in the slide, transactional. It's a quick and dirty passing on of information more than anything else. Whereas mentoring, when it's at its most effective, is not a transaction. It's a relationship. It's about the longer term growth of an individual into their environment and into becoming the person that they want to be. So I think what we've called it mentoring light because it's not really mentoring, but it's something that is highly useful within organisations and maybe part of the overall spectrum of helping people to become more effective in their roles.
So an example of mentoring light that we're often asked about is speed mentoring. What do you think about that, David?
Yeah, well, it's great if you can go to somebody and ask a question, but you might as well be you're picking up the phone to a lawyer or any other kind of a specialist. You wouldn't call that relationship mentoring. You would simply say, I'm getting some guidance from somebody. And in this particular case, speed mentoring tends to be free, but not always. Quite a lot of these programs that are actually charging people. It's really, again, it's not mentoring. It's a professional advice or semi-professional advisory service.
Yeah, so I think we agree that technology is there to enable and enhance the human relationship, and where you actually have those two working in partnership, that's where you get the best outcomes. So getting back to, well, how do you get the best outcomes in mentoring? I know this is somewhat controversial, this headline, but I think many organisations that embark on designing and setting up a mentoring program, many of them fail. And it's because they maybe don't do the design, don't do the thinking, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, but importantly, they don't do the preparation that's required. So some of David's research, for example, suggests that without preparing mentors and mentees for the mentoring relationship, probably 2 out of 3 relationships will actually fall over. So, having a coffee catch-up doesn't constitute mentoring. There needs to be some conversation that allows people to learn and develop as a result of it. So we have just a little bit of a framework to say, well, okay, what are the phases that you would need to go through in order to design an effective program? There's a kind of getting ready or a pre-design phase where you're really thinking about who is it that we might want to involve in terms of stakeholders across the organisation to have a say in how this mentoring program works. Will we have adequate resources? And why are we actually running this program? What's the purpose of the program in the first place? You then go into your design phase, which really falls out of some of the questions you might ask in the phase before. And then you move into implementation, so start recruiting, matching, training and support. Some people do these in slightly different orders. And then review so that you're getting feedback and improving for next time. So many times we see people jump into the implementation phase without having done the first two. Now, if you've designed your program well, you will probably discover that if you're running, a semi-structured formal mentoring program, that depending on how many people you have in the program and how high or low touch your program management is, that will determine how much of a full-time job it actually is to run the program. So if you look at the bottom right, if you've got a large number of people, even with a fairly low touch program management approach, it can be close to a full-time job. And that's possibly even using software. So software platforms will actually bring down some of this program management time because it allows you to talk with more people and keep track of your messages more carefully. So that's just something to bear in mind, and a reason, I guess, one of the reasons for using program management software. But I'm interested to know how many of you are running programs, and if you are you actually using some kind of technology to manage your mentoring program? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to answer the poll. We did this when we ran this session earlier, so it'll be interesting to see if we get roughly the same proportions. It's looking like it, David, so far. Can you see those numbers?
I can.
Yeah.
Very similar, yeah.
It's almost identical. Okay, so I think we've got a trend now. So let's share those results. I think this morning we had 75-25.
Yes.
So it's almost the same, yeah. So I'd be interested, for those of you that are using technology to run your programs, how are you finding it? What are some of the things you love? What are some of the irritations with it? Because that's always good to share. So if you could perhaps just use the question box and just put a few comments, we'll try and read them out. It's useful for people. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. One person's saying no, don't have it yet, but we're looking into it. Lack of funding. Yeah. Funding is always an issue. So we'll talk a little bit more about cost, and for many of our clients who are in professional or trade associations, one of the best avenues for funding something like a mentoring program is to actually look for a sponsor. Sponsors love getting involved in mentoring. It's got a real kind of feel-good thing about it. Okay, so I'll review some of those comments in a few minutes. Let's look at, now when I said, are you using technology? Actually, that was a little bit of a trick question, because probably even if you're using some of the methods that I've described on the left here as manual, they are technologies of a kind. Even, if you're just using spreadsheets or emails or some kind of electronic to-do list. So there's a continuum of sophistication. The next level would be to say, okay, well, I can't maybe afford a fully integrated platform, but I do want to maybe use some digital applications. So I do want to digitize, for example, my applications. I want to be doing surveys digitally. I don't want to be doing paper surveys. You probably then need some kind of database technology to keep all of that electronic information. You might want a CRM to help you with your communications to the people in your program. If you're running anything using e-learning, you'll need both software to create the e-learning, and then you'll need a learning management system to host it. You might need some webinar technology. Before you know it, there's a plethora of apps that you actually need to use. And then, of course, the most sophisticated is, on the right-hand side, an integrated platform which brings together your applications, your database, your matching, integrated e-learning if your provider is offering that, messaging, maybe they can book appointments, mentor and mentee with one another. Not so many of them yet are integrating webinars and virtual meetings, but that will probably come as well. So if you're doing it the middle way, this just gives you an idea of the kind of applications you would have to sign up for in order to enable all of that. So in many ways, the integrated approach actually in the end probably does, it will be more expensive, but it's a lot easier to manage than all of these apps. So when to implement an integrated solution, I might just quickly put this one up. So if you were to Google mentoring software, you will find at least 50 companies that offer this kind of software. Now, I'm not going to go into brands. I'm not going to talk benefits at one over another. But, there's many of them around. They all have different features. So we're going to try and help you with what are the kinds of questions you might want to ask to know whether this is the right one for you. Okay, so when does it make sense to implement an integrated solution? Firstly, when you have size. So on our version of this webinar earlier today, we had one person who said, well, I've only got 10 pairs, but already that's getting cumbersome. We run lots of programs all the time, and I think anytime you get over about 20 pairs, it starts to get hard to keep track of everybody and all the messages, with that number of people without a platform. Equally, if you're running multiple programs, so you need a way of maybe assisting mentors to move from one program to another easily. They don't have to apply again. It makes sense to have a platform. If you're looking for ways to save administrative time, if you need to have different program managers, so maybe you have one person working some days of the week and somebody else is looking after it other days of the week, it's really helpful to be able to have those two people log in and see what the other person has said to people. You can keep track that way. If you need to, you can integrate it with other systems that you're already using. So, for example, a human resources information system, or if you're in the association world, then an association management system. That means you'll be able to port data across between the two, from the mentoring platform back to the other and vice versa. Makes it a lot easier, for example, for people to fill in applications if you can have some of those fields pre-populated, and you might want to keep track of who's been in the program, who they've been matched with. You might want to keep that in your main system. And if you're looking for a plug-and-play solution, then you really need to go the integrated approach. And by that I mean, I just want a best practice mentoring program solution, technology-enabled, with everything I need. Off I go. Then you'll certainly need the technology to do that. The kinds of features to look out for are many. I like to think about, well, what do you actually need to start with? So start there. So the ability to take applications and enroll people. Matching is one of the key benefits of these electronic platforms because they all use a matching algorithm. You can decide how you want to match people based on perhaps application questions, and then the algorithm will work in the background and suggest matches to you, which generally speaking in most software platforms you can override manually if you wish. And that can be done on some platforms just one by one, and some of them will allow you to bulk match everybody at once in the most optimal way. You will need the messaging, so being able to communicate with all the participants. Some of them offer some really good guided workflow which can incorporate some continued education. Some of the providers will give you source content for that. With many of them you have to create that and provide that for yourself. It should have some kind of knowledge base where the information for your mentors and mentees is accessible, like a library of resources. You'll want to track progress, so you'll want the platform to be able to send out surveys and report and report back on that and give you some basic analytics. Some of the features that some platforms have which are less well used by people are things like booking events. So often we'll have, when a program starts, we'll have a program launch event. We might have another one in the middle to check progress. In fact, we always do. And then another one at the end, which could all be done by webinar if you're running a virtual program. Do you really need the platform to be able to host those events and run those events and give people calendar invites? Some of them have forum space for mentors and mentees to talk within their cohorts, often not used. Goal tracking, we talked about this earlier. David, do you want to make a comment about that? I think your point is really important.
Yeah, basically, if you've got a system of tracking goals, it has a habit of coming back to bite you, simply because it tends to be overly rigid. What we know from the research is very clearly that the goals that people set at the beginning of a mentoring relationship will change and evolve as they become more aware of themselves and more aware of the context in which they operate. If you've got a goal that if your system doesn't allow for this goal evolution, you're basically setting people up to pursue, but rigorously, the wrong path and waste their time. We see frequently that this is one of the things that undermines effective mentoring, simply because people lose interest because they are being pushed down a path which they no longer feel committed to or value.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I'm just getting that slide back up. So yes, I think just, if you're going to go down this path, make sure you're really clear about what kind of features you might want. Clearly the matching capability, because matching is one of the most important parts of effective mentoring programs, but the most time-consuming part. So having help with that is critical. That and the messaging and taking the applications, the database, the knowledge base are probably the most important. Some of the questions that you might want to be asking a provider include these. So firstly, ask them to explain how their matching algorithm works, and ask them, does it support bulk matching or not? If you've got large numbers, you will want that bulk matching capability. Ask them about scalability. Can it support multiple programs and large participant numbers? Ask them about their level of support and service. Some do it well, some not so well. Particularly, do they provide any content, any resources that are, very useful for you to be able to use for your mentors and mentees, or are they just offering you the software as a kind of bare bones scaffold or infrastructure? Security with any kind of IT system is obviously very important. How, where is the data housed? How does their security work? Ask them what features that they have in their platform are used most and which ones are not used. Who was involved in the design of the software? Are they really an IT development company? Do they have any background in understanding mentoring programs and how they work? And ask what integration is possible. And I note a comment, so I've just been checking the question box just while David was talking. Someone was talking, has noted in the question box that integration, particularly in the public sector, can be challenging, in a statewide IT system. Lack of IT support of standalone programs, yeah, it can be difficult. So those are all the things you need to think about before you go down the pathway of jumping into a platform. Someone, I think, had a question about pricing. So, it's a little bit, how long's a piece of string? It can be anywhere from £5,000 to £10,000, dollars, all the way up to, well over 100,000 if you've got very large programs and multiple programs. So again, be careful and think about the investment. Do you really need that technology? And if you do, then, shop around, see what prices are being offered. So have you got anything to add there before we move on to training using technology, David?
No, I think so. From time, we've got to move on. Yeah.
Okay, so thinking about now how technology can be used to support the training that's really important for your mentors and mentees. there's, you know, two ways of thinking about the education process. One is to give them something to get them started. Now, you can do that face-to-face, but if you don't have the opportunity, we really think the best way to do that is through e-learning, where you've got an opportunity to demonstrate the skills of mentoring, particularly for mentors that maybe haven't seen good mentoring in action. So, you know, we've filmed people like us, and, you know, we did a filming session with David just today, which we'll use in the next iteration of our online training. And then the other time that you can continue with some education is throughout the program, either through micro-learning messages. They're short, sharp, just-in-time messages, which could be emails, it could be sending them an article to read, or increasingly people are interested in videos. But also the other opportunity you have is particularly at that midpoint review, where you're getting people back in a room or back on a webinar, is to actually, you know, and particularly with technology, with using webinars, it's a great way to get the mentors and the mentees in separate webinars, talking about how they're going in their mentoring relationships and learning from one another on that call. Many people ask us about what we think about self-serve programs. These are programs that use technology to enable mentees to seek out their own mentors. What you're seeing on the screen is the new LinkedIn. I've just taken a little grab from their ad for their own mentoring program, which they've launched in the US and in Australia. Oddly, I don't know why they've chosen just those two locations, but the way it works is you can identify what are the things that you know you want to make yourself available to people as a mentor about, and mentees can say, I'm interested in connecting with someone about, you know, X, Y, and Z, and then LinkedIn will suggest that you get matched up. So the benefits of that kind of program are, of course, they, you know, relatively cheap to run. There is some evidence that if mentees have some level of choice in the mentor that they have, that can be perhaps more committed. It's good for what David was talking about earlier, that kind of very short-term knowledge transfer and a short-term need. But some of the disadvantages are, you know, we don't really think these programs are good for longer relationship-based mentoring. Clients often come to us after they've tried mentoring using self-serve and it hasn't got traction, and it is hard to get these things off the ground, as I think LinkedIn are going to discover. They really do rely on the participants accessing the kinds of resources they need to get a successful mentoring relationship off the ground. And I think they do leave themselves open for abuse. Did you want to add something on that, David?
Simply that if somebody is going to be able to, well, there's lots of examples of potential abuse. One of the things is if this is used by children, you don't know who the other person at the end of the email is. You don't know whether they are truly another child, for example, if they want to do that, or anything about them. So I think there's some real security issues and safety issues here. And of course, we've got the whole problem. And you have a nice story about that looks at the contractual relationship between the two parties. And the potential for abuse there.
Yeah, that's right. So I signed up for this, just a quick anecdote, just to see what, you know, how it would run and what it was like. The first two people that were suggested to me, I didn't think I could help them with anything, and so I said no. The third person, I thought, yeah, okay, you know, that's interesting. I could probably help this person. I got connected with somebody else in Australia. We're about half an hour into a phone call, and she said, oh, how does this work? So, you know, what are the boundaries in terms of confidentiality? How are we going to agree on, you know, keeping our conversations confidential? And I think this is a very real concern with many of these programs, is that they don't actually have any ground rules, any code of conduct, which is something we strongly recommend. So I'm just looking at this slide. We've still got two different spellings of program on the slide. Kim, I know you're on the call. You're going to have a go at me later, sorry. It's a matter of integrating my slides with David's slides. Anyway, apologies to everyone for that weird spelling. So,
shows how international we are.
It does show how international we are. David, over to you to talk about virtual mentoring relationships.
I think the critical thing to say here is that all of the different ways in which we can communicate between mentor and mentee have their pluses and their minuses. Whether it's using whether it's simple face-to-face, whether it's using synchronous or asynchronous emails, whether it's using Skype or other forms of video-based, or any of the others we talked about at the beginning. And the mixture of these is what, for each relationship, is what really counts. And so having the ability to link people with whichever one's mixture of these will work for them in their relationship and their circumstances appears to be an important part of the whole process. There are some, for example, which are much more difficult to do well. And I'm thinking particularly of trying to mentor by telephone. That's the problem with this is it has most of the disadvantages of other media and none of the real advantages. You don't know if the other person is dead or alive, if there's a silence at the other end of the line. So what you tend to do with telephone coaching is not have any pauses. So there's no reflection time. Now, really, really good mentors who have great listening skills are able to work with this and do this highly effectively. But this isn't going to work for the majority of people. So you're going to get quite shallow conversations simply because the need to be sure the other person is still with you.
Sorry, David, just moving the slide on.
Okay. So I think what we find is that that virtual mentoring and face-to-face mentoring both have lots of advantages, but virtual mentoring is growing a great deal faster simply because it has the advantage that you can do it when you need it. You haven't got to wait to fix up a physical meeting with somebody. So it's convenient, it's fast. You can basically meet up virtually within hours of having a need, and particularly with today's millennials, that seems to fit very much with their lifestyle and expectations. It's also quite clear from various bits of research that the power distance or the sense of being overawed by the other person's greater authority is significantly diminished when you're using virtual media. Also, when you're on Skype or any one of these other electronic media, you have a conversation. You can suddenly say, well, let's pull up this information here, or there's a TED talk, or there's a paper I'd like to show you now and share with you. All of that stuff can be done as you talk in a much more effective way than if you've got to go suddenly rummaging through papers in a face-to-face meeting. So, and one of the things that I find really helpful is that the virtual media, particularly asynchronous ones, where you ask a question on an email, for example, and then the response comes back later. And any one of the other kinds of texting or messenger or any of those tools, you ask a question, the other person has got time to think about it. So the quality of the responses you get is much better than if they're just responding off the cuff in the moment. Some of the, and here we've got some of the disadvantages. It's much more difficult to train people online to be able to do a mentoring properly. It is possible. We have done it, and we've seen it done, but it actually takes a lot more effort to do that. And people need to go away and practice and reflect upon their practice. So you're putting much more of an emphasis on people doing it for themselves and then coming back and sharing their experiences. It's generally harder to build rapport at a distance, a deep sense of rapport. So you've got to spend a lot more time actually getting people to share understanding of each other, particularly when they're culturally diverse. Some of the things like role modeling and job shadowing are much more difficult to do at a distance. And of course, some older people in particular may be not so comfortable with the technology. They're less adventurous, and struggle with it. So they probably need a lot of help from a younger mentee in doing it. We've talked about the difficulties with Skype and others of line outage. You know, when the sound goes, the quality of the conversation goes, and if the conversation gets interrupted, you've got to keep redialing each other. That isn't conducive to really meaningful conversations. And there's some evidence to suggest that with that mentoring relationships which are conducted primarily at a distance are a little bit easier to walk away from, because you don't have to eyeball the person and say, I actually don't want to carry this on.
Thanks, David. So some virtual tips. I think these are some of the things we've learned over the many years of running virtual programs. I think because if you're running a completely virtual program, it is very tempting to try that self-serve approach where anyone can sign up anytime. It's actually harder for you as a program manager. It's better to actually put people into cohorts and perhaps roll them out in cohorts, and I'll show you a quick example of that in a minute. Make sure you're providing participants with plenty of structure and good quality resource materials. They may not all use them, but the ones that need them really do need them. So you'll probably get feedback from some people saying, you know, you gave me more than I needed, but you'll get feedback from many saying, thank you for providing that. Make sure each cohort has some opportunities to get on a call with the group, whether that's a teleconference or a webinar, so that there, you know, is an opportunity to speak with some other humans about how it's going. If you're going to run a completely virtual program, we've found you probably do need slightly more high-touch program management than if people are coming into a central location, for example, for meetings. We would always do some mentoring training up front, but it's a good idea to supplement that with some ideas and tips on how to make the most of a virtual relationship. And give them access to good video demonstrations and interviews online. We find it's more effective than the slide-by-slide training approach. So here's a case study. This is an Australian one. It's run by Australian Women in Resources Alliance, which is part of an association that is in the mining sector in Australia. It was set up for women working in remote sites, so didn't have access to a suitable mentor anywhere near them. The whole program is run online. The training is done online. The webinars, all the program events are done by webinar. And the participants are using a mixture, as David said, of Skype, email, text messaging, phone calls. Sometimes people find themselves in the same physical space as their partner, so they do use that opportunity to meet face-to-face, but it doesn't always happen. Now, you can expect the same kind of program outcomes with a virtual program as with a face-to-face program. So in this case, you know, we've had very high match satisfaction with this program. Mentees are saying they're achieving the goals that they set for themselves. They're satisfied with their experience, and mentors, importantly, are very satisfied with their experience. Quite a low dropout rate. In fact, I was speaking to them the other day, and they're saying the dropout rate's even, you know, almost zero now. They've fine-tuned their onboarding and their support so well that they're hardly getting any dropouts, which is fantastic. And they get the mentors coming back year after year. With the first cohort, we went back and asked them 12 months later, what were the benefits for you out of the program? We gave them a whole list of things that they could select from, and these were the top 4 for mentees. You should, again, with a well-designed program, expect mentors to be giving you the same kind of feedback. It'll be different things, but things that they're finding important and useful takeaways. So I think the key success factors of this particular program, which was government funded and has been rolling now for 4 years, is firstly the resource materials. They work really hard to prepare mentees and mentors well to start with aligned expectations and really understand how to make the most of their time together. They've got very effective matching and program management using technology. And it's a sensible use of technology, so they're using a matching algorithm, but they're making sure that they are checking that and overriding it as they need to, rather than just blindly rolling out what the platform says. So we might just pause for a minute before we talk about technology in the future and just see if there are any questions or comments about what you've heard so far. Any questions you have for David or for me? Keep them coming in.
Somebody just asking whether the slides are going to be emailed out, and the answer
yes.
is you will get access to recording, and yes, you will get the slides if you wish them.
Yeah. We did manage to remember to press the record button this time, David. I'm very proud of us. Okay, let's see if we can. So keep the questions coming in. David, do you want to kick off on your thoughts on where mentoring technology might go?
Okay, so yeah, what we're certainly seeing the signs of is that the new platforms, the new technology for mentoring has got to be much more integratable than it even is now. You want to know what's happening, particularly in large schemes, and you want to be able to link as much of the content that people need to make their relationships work as well, and the media as you possibly can. And I put the emphasis on content because people often have lots of inquiries, lots of things they don't know what to do, where they run into problems. They're constantly ringing up and asking somebody for help. That's very labour intensive on the program management. So, and what generally happens is they try and muddle through, and that reduces the effectiveness of the mentoring program as a whole. So having this much more integrated level of content and process is, I think, inevitable in terms of well-managed programs. We're going to see, I think, a lot more use of the kind of things like chatbots that we referred to at the beginning, that do have useful algorithms that you can use to inform the conversation, to give you ideas of patterns, things you might have missed, simply to give you suggestions of ways in which you might take the conversation, or indeed of things to think about afterwards, because we think about mentoring as happening something that happens just within the 60 minutes or so where people get together. But often most of the thinking comes afterwards when people have time to reflect. And so analysis and giving people things to think about, new questions to ask, is, I think, an area that we're going to see grow quite a lot. We probably won't ever see AI mentors, for the simple reason that, at least not proper relationship-based mentors, simply because it is a relationship, and an AI can't yet, and we're not in the conceivable future, create a real relationship. What it can do, it's very good at analysis and supporting relationships. And so, while we certainly think can see that some of the more basic levels of coaching might be vulnerable to be taken over by AIs, simply because they are very rote and predictable. In mentoring, we're really trying to tap into individual experience, which is by its nature individual and not easily replicable. But we probably will see a certain amount of program management taken over by AIs, for example, interviewing people at an early stage to see what their needs from the program are, or selecting people simply on the basis of well-developed and algorithms, and learning about what people's needs are. So I think there is a wide range of potential usage there, and in particular one that's already being used in some contexts is analysing what's going on in conversations between mentor and mentee, and then using that data to put out messages, content that will actually support people, because you identify that there is a trend for people to be worrying about a particular issue or stuck on a particular issue. So responding to the needs of mentors and mentees, again, is something we can use AI for.
Yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to see how it evolves, and it won't be linear. It'll go in directions that probably we can't predict, but we're certainly starting to move in that direction already. So we might just answer some of the questions, David. What's the smallest program you've seen which used a lot of technology? I don't think I've seen too many that have less than 20 pairs. Have you, David?
No, I haven't seen any with less than that.
Yeah.
We have quite a few which tap into the into content databases.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the only one that's the only area that I can think of. Certainly, full-blown platforms, that would be very rare.
Okay. Comment from Angie. I use an integrated platform and introduced it when the program expanded from 20 to 50 pairs. It's been invaluable. I'll bet matching 50 pairs manually is quite a job. Dave is saying virtual software sounds great, but I run a program as a volunteer on top of running 3 companies. Yes, how often do we hear that? I have no idea how I'll find the time to create structure and content. Yeah.
Well, you don't have to create it. If it's there, you can which this isn't a sales pitch, so we're very careful not to do that. But if you'd like a trial access to the coaching and mentoring resource, which has hundreds and hundreds of briefings for mentors, then we're very happy to arrange that for you, and that costs nothing.
Okay, question from Louise. For electronically matched mentors and mentees, what's the typical criteria? Usually, so what you're trying to do with the matching algorithm is really rule out as unsuitable the matches that just won't work. So typically the criteria we would recommend will be things like number of years of experience, because you don't necessarily want someone with 25 to 30 years experience mentoring your most junior people in your organization, simply because it can be, take them a lot longer to build rapport, and it can be quite hard for people to remember what things were like for them 20 years ago. So that might be one. You might do something on the basis of location, because you might want people to be able to meet face to face. You might, if it's an internal program, be basing it on job grades. So you want to match people up in suitable distance, maybe 1 or 2 steps away from one another. But probably the one that's universal would be, what are the learning needs of the mentee matched with what are the areas of strength for the mentor? So, very much driven by the mentee needs and how a mentor could help them. Have you seen any others?
The main thing that came from our research 20 years ago was in looking at how people did make manual pairings, was that they made a judgment about getting enough similarity between them to be able to build rapport and have meaningful conversations, but at the same time enough difference to put some real grit in the oyster, and getting that balance between similarity and difference is an art, but you can perform that process a lot better if you have matching software that just tells you more about the individuals and gives you some initial guidance, rather than just have a mass of people and thinking, how the hell am I going to sort through all this data?
Exactly. Well, we're going through a process at the moment where we are matching 200 pairs, helping a client do that. And, we're dividing it into batches because that makes it much easier. As it happens, they want to match within regions, so that defines what the batches are. Okay. Comment from Kerry, loving the future of HR, L&D with AI, exciting times ahead. No wonder my 7-year-old Year 2 child is learning to code as part of the K2 curriculum. Excellent, Kerry, love it. Okay, any other questions before we wrap up? Please send them in, or any other comments we'd love to hear. I'll just put up the last slide and we'll wrap up.
Okay, there's a couple of you would like to have a play with the coaching mentoring resource. We will what we will do is send out, it'll be next week because my PA's on holiday this week, but we'll send you out an access code which will give you a month's full access to play with all the resources on it. And I hope you enjoy it.
Yeah, great. Thanks, David. So what you can do next is think about some of these things. What's the purpose of your program? What are you trying to achieve if you're thinking about starting a new program? What level of scale do you have? And that will determine how much you need to invest. What interaction do you want between the human and the technology part? So I hope you've got the message that as we see it, they need to be mutually supportive. If you go too far down the technology route, you'll get resistance, people won't adopt it well, and you'll end up perhaps with shallow outcomes. If you don't use technology enough, you're really missing an opportunity to get at, mentoring accessible for many more people and to enrich conversations through the more information that you can provide for people. So I'm also going to put up the next slide, which has my contact details. If you're interested in knowing more about any of these technologies, please by all means get in contact with us. Very happy to point you in the right direction. Somebody asked me this morning if there's 50+ mentor software companies out there. Does anyone have a list of all of them with all the different features? No, not that I know of. It would be good to have one. So I think our time is up. Are there any more questions?
Can I leave you with one interesting thought? And that is, we've talked about the use of all this technology for supporting mentoring. But one of the things that's been mooted is, can we actually build the partnership with technology by using mentors to mentor AI? And that's an interesting, I think, an interesting idea to leave you to ponder.
Very interesting idea. Thank you, David. So thank you very much for joining us. You will receive a link to the recording of the webinar. So I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any more questions for David or for me. David, do you want to just mention your email address?
Yeah, my email address is david@davidclutterbuckpartnership.com. So I'll repeat that, david@davidclutterbuckpartnership.com.
So thanks for joining us. Don't forget there are more of these webinars in the series. Next one, David and I will be talking about mentoring for professional associations, but there's lots more coming next year as well. So stay tuned and we look forward to seeing you on some of those as well. Bye for now.
Bye then.